Welcome to the Performance Banker Podcast. You'll hear banking industry experts providing unique insights and expertise to help bankers achieve higher performance, obtain outstanding results, and gain a competitive advantage. Here's your host, Tonya.
Welcome to today's Performance Banker Podcast. Today I have Jeff Starke, another successful banker. Jeff, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Tonya. Pleasure to be here.
So excited to have you. I'm looking forward to this interview since we scheduled it a couple of weeks ago. I've been looking forward to having you here on the interview. Tell us today, how did you get into banking?
So it was an interesting journey. I was going to school for a network engineering degree and knew that I wanted to kind of get a jump start and get to work in the field, and was able to land a job working in a contact center doing online banking and bill pay support for banks and credit unions all over the country. And I continued to work there and moved through the ranks in that contact center environment while I finished school, and then moved into a network engineering position for the same company and continued to work alongside banks. It was a banking software provider, and I really enjoyed what I learned as I explored the world of banking. And I felt like there was a huge opportunity for technology to positively impact the banking environment. So ultimately made the decision to move from the software side of the house and went to work for a small community bank in the Metro Atlanta area. And I've been a banker ever since.
I love that. So today you're with Republic Bank in Louisville, Kentucky. And congratulations on that. That was a recent move. And you and I had the opportunity to work several years together at your previous employment, Bank OZK. And I loved working with you. I feel like that even I became more successful working with you. And that was a great opportunity. And so how did you get from there in Georgia at the small community bank to where you are today at Republic Bank doing what you're doing? And you can share a little bit about that with us.
Sure. Not a simple answer to that question. It's a complex journey. I worked for that first community bank for a few years. That was in Southwest Metro Atlanta, and ultimately moved to a little bigger but still small community bank on the northwest side of Atlanta, and was there several years. That was during the '08 to 2010 kind of financial housing crisis. And ultimately, the bank that I worked for in Northwest Metro Atlanta was closed by the FDIC. The remaining assets of that bank were then purchased by what is now Bank OZK, what was at the time Bank of the Ozarks. And they initially asked me to stay on and help get through the conversion and make sure that all the technology was successfully converted into their systems, and then ultimately asked me to stay on board permanently. The roles throughout the years at all three of those banks and today at Republic Bank have been quite different. So a lot of different roles along that journey. So I think, how did I get from where I started to where I am today? Not one thing, several different things. I would start with hard work, and I'll define that a little further, meaning be willing to work harder than the role. Whatever role you have, I think you have to be willing to not only fulfill that role, but to go above and beyond the definition of what that role is. I think that was a key for me throughout the course of my career and continues to be. Second thing I would point out is survey the organization. Wherever you're working, take a look around and examine what's going on. Look for where the gaps are. and be prepared to step in and fill those gaps. Be willing to do the work that others don't want to do. Um, Next, I think it's really important to set goals for
Mm,
yourself. And further, to put timelines on those goals. It's one thing to have a goal, but if you set a goal and leave it open ended and say, well, I want to accomplish X someday,
right.
you're not super likely to get there. Um, you need to put some sort of timeline on it. It's okay if you don't necessarily meet that timeline, but putting a timeline on it puts priority on it. And I think it's helpful to do that to be able to accomplish whatever the goal is. The other thing I think is important around goal setting is share it with others.
Yes.
That holds you accountable. Once other people are aware that this is a goal, it puts a certain amount of accountability in play. And if it's your managers or leadership, it gives them the opportunity to help you achieve that goal. They
Absolutely.
may be perfectly willing to move you into a different role, but if they don't know that you have any interest, they might not think about moving you into a different role. And then finally, I would say find other people that you respect, admire, and listen to them and learn from them. Um, Really, really important to have other people around you that you can learn from. Other people know things you don't. And I think a big part of that is surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you,
Absolutely.
particularly on the leadership journey.
Mhm.
If you want
Oh,
to be a successful leader, you need to have people that are smarter than you.
oh, Jeff, I love. I mean, you really laid some goals. I mean, some gold down. And I don't know that I've taken notes when I've had other people on here, but I did. I jotted down three things that I'd like to come back and just ask your thoughts about. You said survey the organization. And, when you say that, so what that means to me, and I would like for you to expound on that, especially if my meaning of what you're saying is different. But when you say that, the first thing I thought of was find leaders or people that are smarter than you that you just ended with, that know what they're doing, and maybe model, mimic, and master what they're doing, and pick up what they're doing right and follow it and do it, because that, if they're successful, that will help you be successful. And that was one of the things that I did early on. Tyler Vance, for example, I even posted on Facebook yesterday what a great leader he is. You're a great leader, but those things of people that do that that are great things and great leadership models, if you model and mimic what they do, you too can be successful. So I'm just curious, when you say survey the organization, is that what you're talking about? Or if there's more to that, please share.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that absolutely is a key part of it, Tanya. I would add to that, also learn from people that are maybe doing things that aren't the best thing.
Uh,
There's a lot that can be
wow.
learned
Yes. Yeah.
from those that are maybe not approaching things in the best way.
I love it.
Um,
True.
when I say survey the organization, every organization has an opportunity to get better, just as every person has
So
opportunities to
true.
get better. So, maybe I'll give an example. When I was at one of the organizations I was with, there was no formal project management at all in the organization. All the project management was being done by business line leaders and whoever was sort of the champion of the project, right? And really wanted to get the project done was essentially functioning as both a project team member and the project manager. And that's pretty common in a lot of particularly young and smaller organizations. But the organization I was working for was certainly large enough, had a volume high enough of projects and projects with enough complexity that it seemed to me there needed to be some formal project management discipline instilled in the organization. So, seeing that as a result of surveying the organization, I went and pursued getting my project management professional or PMP certification. And I did that because I felt like the organization had a gap and I wanted to make sure that I was prepared and educated to fill that gap. No one asked me to do it. No one came to me and said, "Hey, we think we have a gap here." It was simply me surveying the organization and identifying what I believed was a gap that would need to be filled, and then making sure I was prepared for
Mhm.
the eventuality that there might be an opportunity there.
I love that. I love that. I love that because those are some of the things I've been able to do with consulting. You see previous gaps and you go and you work for institutions. You can help them implement things that you've seen in other places that were gaps to keep them from making the same mistakes.
Yeah,
I love that.
absolutely.
Such gold. So, what has been the most rewarding part, Jeff, of your success?
That's that's an easy one. Far and away, the most rewarding part of the success that I've enjoyed has been what it enables me to do for others. Um, that is to this day the most rewarding part of what I do. And I mean that a few different ways. Number one, I've been able to help other people develop their careers as I've moved through my own journey. And it's incredibly rewarding to know that you can positively impact another human in their career journey and in their life journey. Um, Also, things that I've been able to do financially. I had a team member, an employee that worked with me at one point that hated to travel, just hated it. And a need arose for that individual to travel to Florida, to a beach town, but it was business travel. I knew the individual was not going to enjoy it. However, I also knew that their wife absolutely loved the beach. So obviously, the company was not going to pay for the individual's wife to fly to this beach town, although the company was going to pay for the hotel. So my wife and I decided that personally, we would purchase a plane ticket for the individual's wife and send her with him, and let her enjoy some time at the beach. So I think, with success often comes financial reward, and it's an amazing thing to be able to share that with others. So overall, I would say the most rewarding part of my success is just what it's enabled me to do to impact others' lives positively.
Mhm. Jeff, you're so right on. That almost brings tears to my eyes because that's exactly to me what it's all about. When you can be successful and help others be successful, um, it goes with why do you do what you do? And if you can bring happiness to other people who are less fortunate, or um, and for that individual to not enjoy travel, but you needed them to go for the team or for the company, but to be able to maybe bring some happiness to the family or to the spouse. I mean, what you did for them and to see the happiness in her, probably more so than him, but
Yeah.
it's, you can't, until you experience that, it's hard to get people to understand. But the success of going through, I call it the success ladder, climbing that ladder and being able to do for others, there is nothing in this world like that. And I give you kudos because, like I say, it brings emotional tears of happiness to me to be able to see that other people enjoy doing that. That was the biggest reward for me. I didn't send somebody on a plane. I've done that before, but I've done other things that just absolutely give you the gratitude every single day. And you will be able to continue as you continue to grow to just light up people's life, their business and their life. So let's switch this just a little bit. I love talking about the happy, but not everything as you're climbing that success ladder is full of happiness. What has been the most difficult or even the most challenging as you climb that ladder of success?
I think really two things, patience and resilience. Um, you know, oftentimes I think people have a vision of success and a vision of the pace at which it can come. And the reality is that it's probably not going to come at whatever you think the pace may be or whatever you think the pace should be. Sometimes it comes faster, quite honestly, and a lot of times it comes slower. You may have to work very hard for a time period much longer than you feel like you should in order to get where you're trying to go. So that requires patience, because if you're not patient, it's going to cause you to make rash decisions. And if you make rash decisions, you're likely going to cut yourself off from opportunities that could have been there had you been a little more patient. The other component is resilience. You have to stay the course. You can't give up. And there's going to be challenges. There are going to be things that make it difficult. You're going to be asked to accomplish two things that might be diametrically opposed and still expected to be able to accomplish both, and have to figure out how to balance those two things, knowing that these are pulling in opposite directions, but I'm being asked to accomplish both. You're going to run into people that want nothing more than to make sure you don't accomplish what you're setting out to accomplish.
So true.
It happens, and you have to just be patient and you have to be resilient. You have to know what you want and refuse to give up.
I completely agree. And I don't know if I'm even going to ask this question correctly, Jeff, and maybe you can even read between the lines, and this is not one of the questions here, so I'm kind of throwing this on you, but how do you, when people are faced with patience and resilience like this, how do you sit down and have that conversation with them? Because I know there's lots of people who want to be successful and they're trying to make decisions today. How do you tell them? And you've touched on it, but how do you tell them, be patient, but be resilient?
Yeah. I think I'm a firm believer that honesty is always the best policy. So I think how do you tell them honestly? And with that, I would add, often that means bluntly. And I think a lot of times as humans and as leaders, we can struggle to say things that we don't think the person on the other side wants to hear. And you got to say them. You just have to be honest, and you have to be unafraid to be blunt, because if you really care about the person sitting on the other side of the desk or the table or on the other side of the video chat or whatever it is, it's not going to do them any good to not be honest, to not have the difficult conversation, to not tell them the thing that they don't want to hear. So I think that's how you have to address it. You have to be willing to say, look, I understand that this is what you're trying to accomplish. I understand that you feel like you've already done what should be needed to accomplish it and you don't have it. And so you're feeling impatient, but here's why you're not there yet. And sometimes that means just giving people perspective on external forces and factors, because sometimes that's what it comes down to. it may not be that they haven't done everything they should have done, or that they're not qualified for the role. The role simply may not exist or may not be available at that moment in time. And when that's the case, you have to be honest and just share with the person, you have done everything that is required. You are prepared, you are ready. However, the opportunity isn't there.
Right.
Sometimes I think when people are successful, others will say, gosh, Tonya, how did you get so lucky?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, that's often only the case if you define luck as preparation meeting opportunity.
Yes.
You got to have both, right? So the one that you can control directly is you can make sure you're prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Opportunity, you may not be able to directly control.
That's right.
So you can be prepared. And then when opportunity knocks, you're ready to answer the door.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You never know when you might meet someone who has been waiting for an opportunity to come knocking at their door. They've been waiting on the right person.
Yeah.
Or you never know when your company it has a roadmap, but they're not there yet. And you have to wait till that door opens. I mean, there's all types of challenges for individuals that they have to be patient for.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I love that. And I've always loved your honesty, because you and I've had lots of honest conversations. And just earlier this week, I had someone say, man, you're so honest. You tell it like it is. And I have said, I am, because I've learned that that's what people need today. I don't want to hide anything. If you ask my opinion, you better want my opinion. If you want to know if a certain outfit looks good on you, you better want to hear the truth, because you're going to get it. So, but you're right. Honesty is the right thing. And if I ask someone if I'm doing something right or wrong, I want to know, because that's how I improve. Yeah. And so the same there for you. So I love how you've stated that. So what is the most important lesson, Jeff, that you have learned during your career?
It's pretty easy for me to answer. Most of my adult working career has been in leadership roles. And I think the most important lesson learned, leaders are only ever as good as their team.
Oh, that's good.
No matter what you do as a leader, you're not any good unless your team is good. And that only becomes more and more true the higher that you climb on the leadership journey. Because as you move through levels of leadership, you become further and further removed from the individual task completion components of work, which means you're more and more focused on setting the vision, setting the strategy, but you're only going to be successful if someone executes that strategy. And the more and more that you're not the person or the people who are actually going and executing the tasks to make that strategy successful, the more dependent you become on your team to do those things. And if they're not bought in, if they don't believe in you, if they don't understand your vision, if they don't want to go execute on that strategy, you're not going to be successful. So far and away, the most important lesson for me is a leader is only ever as good as their team.
Yes. So they have to be in perfect alignment with you the company. What do you think about, you hear people say that as a leader, I've been guilty of saying this, but I'd like to know your thought. I like to hire people that have better skill sets than myself.
Yeah, 100%. You should. That's that's one of the ways that you're going to help yourself in being successful as a leader. And I think sometimes, particularly when people are early in their leadership journey, there's a tendency to not do that, right? There's a fear factor that can exist of, well, but if I hire that person and they know things that I don't know, if they're smarter than I am, if they can do things that I can't do, aren't I putting myself at risk? Aren't they going to take my job? And that kind of thinking is detrimental as a leader. And again, the higher that you are in the leadership structure and journey, the more and more that becomes true. If you think about the role of a CEO, a CEO is never going to know how to do every single task that needs to be done in their company. It's impossible. And it would be, quite honestly, not the highest and best use of their time for them to understand the details of how to do everything that needs to be done to make their company go. So they have to hire people that know how to do things that they don't know, that are smarter than they are in certain ways or in certain subject matter domains. So I think as a leader, that's a critical component, that you're unafraid, and not only unafraid, but that you are proactively going out and seeking to put people on your team that are smarter than you in certain ways, that know things that you don't know. I also think that's a place where diversity comes into the equation. Sometimes it's not just about them being smarter or them knowing something you don't know. It's also about them having a different perspective, a different background, a different upbringing, a different education, whatever the case may be. You're going to be more successful as a leader and have a more productive team if you have multiple viewpoints, multiple perspectives, and there's open dialogue and discourse. You're much more likely to arrive at the best solution versus sitting in a room with a group of people who are just going to wait for someone to say, here's what I think, and then all shake their head up and down and go, yeah,
And
that's
say,
a good
I
idea.
agree. I agree with them.
Yeah.
Completely agree. And then for us as leaders to turn around and teach those that are supervisors and managers the very same thing that we know, for them not to be afraid to turn around and teach their staff the very same thing. I love
I
that.
always looked at it as a benefit, and in a lot of ways a springboard, right?
Yes.
If I want to move forward, if I have something else that I want to go on and accomplish, I have to make it possible for a company to allow that to happen or facilitate that happening for me, which I'm not really helping the company do or empowering them to do if I'm the one person that possesses the knowledge on how to complete a certain task or a certain set of tasks, or I am the subject matter expert and the only subject matter expert in a certain knowledge domain. So for me, hiring and grooming and developing people to do things that I'm not capable of doing, to do them better than I'm capable of doing them, was always a way to make sure that I could move on to do something else. That yes, we have someone who can handle those responsibilities, and maybe they can do them better than I can do them. So that makes it possible for me to move on and do something else. And the company's still going to be in good shape.
Right. Right. Jeff, I learned that, I'm going to say the hard way. And I use it in training often because I want to teach people that they have to be prepared for the next step, just like you're talking about, because, during an annual review one time, the bank president, Mark Ross, at that point in time, he was asking me who were my backups in certain areas, as I was the manager of, back then it was deposit operations, but we called it branch support back then. And he was like, who are your backups in these certain areas? And it was fairly small back then. We had like 12 people, and we were having that conversation, and it was such a pivotal moment in my career. And, I had to say, gee, I have fallen down, and I had several promotions, but I had fallen down, Jeff. And he was like, I can't move you any higher in the company. And he was my mentor, for years, but he was like, I can't move you any higher until you have replacements in place.
Yeah.
And that was at the end of a week. Jeff, that early that next week, I got into my office with the doors closed, and no kidding, I had a plan. I drew it all out. I had a plan, and I knew who was going to back me up, who was going to back this one up, who was going to back that one up, and a timeline, just like you talked about with goals. I had it mapped out, and that was the last time that not every position didn't have a backup. There was a plan from that moment forward. It was a pivotal moment in my life. And I can remember the conversation as though it was happening now. But from that point forward, those are the types of conversations that I have with managers today. Is you have to have a plan, and you have to be a leader. And to me, that comes with leading, and you want them to be better than you. Absolutely. So, Jeff, what is a myth? There's so many myths out there about, our jobs and our field of expertise. What is one about your role? I'd love to hear, because I know there's plenty.
Oh, I'm going to give you two, because I'm going to give you one that is a myth about bankers and one that's a myth about technologists.
Oh, great.
I consider myself a banker first, and a technologist second. So in banking, I think the biggest myth out there still to this day is, oh, you're a banker, it must be nice to work banker's hours.
Absolutely.
I just chuckle every time someone says it. I'm like, oh, you mean 24/7, 365? Because
for you it is, yes.
Do not expect for your online banking and mobile banking to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
True.
So I always laugh when people ask me about banker's hours. And then from a technology perspective, I think it's someone who's not in the technology realm. You get introduced and they'll say, oh, okay, you're in technology. And the automatic assumption is often, so you must know everything about every technology that exists today or ever has existed. And that's just not at all true. Technology is a massively broad field. There's new technology coming out every day. The existing technologies are constantly changing. And if you ever meet someone who tells you they do know everything about all technology, run. Because it's not possible, and we're learning something new every single day.
Jeff, I believe you know everything about technology. I mean, I've contacted you about Clubhouse and TikTok and, all of those things. So, I truly believe that you know everything about technology, but I do understand what you're talking about. Those two have got to be the best out there. You're right. So what is the biggest challenge that you're facing in your role today, and how are you tackling that?
Right now, I would say the biggest challenge is balancing the need for talent against cost and efficiency. The job market has been red hot, maybe white hot, in all areas, in all verticals. And one of the things about technology is when I'm looking for new talent to bring into the organization, I'm not just competing against other banks. I'm competing against almost every other company that exists because almost every company today needs technologists in
Mm,
some capacity, in some form. At the same time, as a bank, we need to remain efficient and we need to maintain a certain amount of efficiency in our organization and control what our costs are from all aspects, the technology itself as well as personnel. Um, so, what are we doing to work through that? How am I trying to combat that? Number one, spending a lot of time working to make sure that we're developing our existing talent to meet their full potential. We have incredible people here. And I think in a lot of organizations, there are incredible people.
mhm,
Unfortunately, often people are not cultivated and fostered to reach their full potential. And it takes time and energy to develop a person's full potential. It takes empowerment and being willing to not micromanage and pass along decision making authority.
mhm,
But I think the biggest thing is just working to develop the existing talent that exists in the organization. And then the second thing I would say is setting clear expectations for
yes.
any and all roles that exist in the organization. And one of those expectations, from my perspective, always being if it is possible, go above and beyond.
Mhm,
Don't strive just to do the job, strive to do the job and go beyond.
mhm.
And that's a baked in expectation from my perspective. If you can, you should. And then the final thing I would say on that subject is bringing new talent into the organization. And I think it's important to do that because it can infuse a new perspective and a new life in the organization. You need people who have significant tenure in every organization. That's how institutional knowledge is built. It's how stability takes hold. It's how you can keep culture consistent. There's a ton of benefit to your existing talent in any organization. There is also benefit in infusing new talent into the organization. At the same time, that has to be done thoughtfully and carefully so that you don't disrupt the progress that exists in the organization. But I think if you can mix the development of your existing talent with infusing new talent into the organization, you can overcome the challenges that are out there right now in the labor market.
Jeff, I agree. And I think that that's so important. And I think that you're on to something. And there's very few, I can count them all in one hand, the companies that I've had conversations with. And what I think is interesting is it's the individuals in your position that has taken this on as a mission to find out what their people are interested in and what they want to do. And I don't know why it's the technologist that's taken on the interest, but it is. And they want to know what does the talent want to be doing every day? And they're wanting to do something with that information. But I think those of you that are doing that, I think you're on to something. Because those that aren't, they're not keeping talent. They're going through the onboarding process and then they're losing the people to somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think that goes right on into the next question that I want to ask you, and that is, in your opinion, what is the essential personality trait and or strength that somebody would need to succeed in banking or even your job?
I've been asked this question quite a few times at this point, and my answer hasn't changed in several years. From a technology perspective, I think the answer people are often expecting is a certain technology or a certain way to think about technology. But To me, before you get into those details, the number one essential trait is the ability to adapt to change.
I think you're right on.
Um, the banking world is and has been changing rapidly. The technology world certainly is in a constant state of change. So to be successful, you have to be able to accept and adapt to the changes that are occurring in the world around us. You've got to be willing to learn every day, and you've got to be willing to look at the changes that are occurring and then examine how you do the things you do, what processes you're using, and consider whether or not you should change those processes and change the way that you're doing what you're doing, because the world around us is changing. And if we don't have the ability to adapt to that change, someone else will.
Completely agree. Change is happening fast and often. So with you saying that about change, Jeff, what is the biggest challenge that you believe that the industry is facing today?
Sure. I think for the banking industry as a whole, the biggest challenge is keeping up with the pace of change. And the volume of vectors that change is coming from. Banks are not only competing with other banks, they're competing with credit unions, they're competing with fintech companies, they're competing with big technology companies. Um, so just based on the volume of vectors that the change is coming from, that
Mhm.
means the pace of change is incredibly rapid. And there's not only the changes that are happening within the banking industry and in the technology space, but there's also change in customer expectations. There's regulatory change, and some of those changes have picked up pace quite a bit as a result of and through the pandemic. I think in many ways, customer expectations changed during the pandemic, in some cases out of necessity. Um, Customers weren't always able to get into a banking center or a branch and do things the way that they were traditionally used to doing them, which meant that banks had to respond and figure out new, different, or ways to extend even existing technologies to still serve the customer's needs, and meet the customers where they wanted to be met. So it's a huge challenge to keep up with the pace of change. And I think the banks that do that the best are the banks that are going to be the most successful as we go forward.
Jeff, let me add just a short answer question to that, because you mentioned something that I think is very interesting. And you mentioned that the pandemic forced a lot of the technology enhancements, if you will. You know, before the pandemic, and I remember this, we worked together on a lot of this, but we tried to push people towards, the digital banking world, and it was difficult. And the pandemic did it for us. And
Yeah.
now we've gotten them used to it. And I think there's a big demand for it now. And I'm even seeing people who didn't want to move that direction having a demand for it. Do you
Yeah.
think we'll continue to see even more and more of that demand, and then some of the banks not being able to actually get there with the demand?
Yeah, Tanya, I completely agree. I think there was a certain demographic that existed that just was not interested in online banking and mobile banking and mobile deposit, et cetera. But as there were scenarios where it was either use that channel or wait and
Mhm.
not be able to get the business conducted that you want or need to get conducted, they said, okay, well, I guess I'll do it that way then.
Right.
And honestly, begrudgingly so in a lot of cases in the
Mhm.
beginning. But what I think we've seen as an industry is once they were there and doing it and realized, wait a minute, you mean I can deposit this check from my couch
Right.
and I'm going to get credit for it right now, and I didn't have to get up and drive to the banking center? In a lot of cases, then it was, well, why would I go back to driving to the banking center to
Mhm.
deposit that check? Um, so I think there has been a lot of growth. How much growth do I think we're going to continue to see? I don't know that we're going to see tremendous volume of growth continue, because I think the pandemic really moved a lot of the non-believers, and the people who believed were already there, right? So I don't know that there's a lot more growth that I would expect us to see. I think there will be some, because I think there still were people who held out and said, "Well, I'll just wait then. I'll wait until I can get into the banking center in a day or 2 days or next week or whatever it is." And some of those people are likely going to be convinced by their friends and family who did make the leap and
Mhm.
are then going to share their stories and their experiences. So I think we'll still see some growth, but I think the biggest volume of growth we probably have already seen.
Mm-hmm. I think so too in those aspects, but I have to wonder if even those people are going to want more and more technology applications to evolve.
I
Uh,
think that's right, Tanya. I think that is where the opportunity comes next is, okay, I can check my balance, I can see my transactions, I can do my mobile deposit. What else can I do digitally?
mhm,
And so, I talk about that as the digitization of banking holistically, right? And really being able to make it possible for a client to do everything that they could do in a banking center without having to go to a banking center.
mhm,
I think branches are important. I think they're going to continue to be important. I think people need to know that there is a real person, there is a place that they can go. But I also think they want the choice. And clients are increasingly going to want to be able to choose whether or not they do decide to go into a banking center,
mhm.
or they just complete whatever the function or transaction they're looking to complete in a digital format.
I completely agree with you. Completely agree. I saw a chat bot the other day that could sell, and I was completely blown away. I, I was like, that really exists. I saw it. It just blows me away at the technology opportunities that are coming. But so tell me, Jeff, how do you self-educate yourself on all of these things that are out there today? Because with this rapid change, um, how do you self-educate and keep on top of what's coming, what's there now, what's coming? It's got to be. You must not have a life.
Well, one of the ways you solve for that is you build it into your life. So,
That must
you
be
know,
that must be
I,
the answer. That's
I,
what
I
I
would,
did. Just kidding.
I would say I, I self-educate through people, and some of that is just simply talking to other people. I try to maintain a fairly large and broad network. And a lot of times I'm able to educate and learn by having conversations with others who know things that I don't. Also, in conversations with people in my network, there's identification of certain books to read, blog posts, websites, online courses to take, certification tracks that they followed. So I generally am cultivating what my education material looks like through my human network. And part of that is always leaving myself open to introducing new people into the network so that there's always a fresh perspective, which helps keep it interesting for me rather than taking a certain online training function and saying, I'm going to take every class from this one provider or
Agree.
signing up for a particular book club. I'm able to get a lot of variation in educational material, and that helps me stay interested and stay engaged.
I completely agree. Two things that I keep up here, and I know you know it because you do it, and that is your contacts equals contracts, and your network equals your net worth. And you are you are great at connections and connecting, and you have an excellent network. So I know you know that, but those are two things that I have learned within the last year and a half. And I too am building those connections and that network. And they both pay great dividends. So you keep doing that, self-educating that way, because it's definitely going to pay you a return. So Jeff, I appreciate you being on today. I'd like to ask you if you have any lasting words that you would like to add to the interview or would like to say to the viewers today as we finish the call.
Tonya, I just want to say thank you for providing me the opportunity. I've enjoyed knowing you over many years and enjoyed our time together today. I appreciate it, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Well, Jeff, I appreciate it. Your success has definitely been one to watch. You have been a phenomenal friend and a phenomenal teammate over the years, and great to work with. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate you being on today. And for those of you that are listening, the reason we do these podcasts and have individuals on like Jeff Starke is because we want you to see the growth of individuals from when they start out and climb their success ladder, and hear their tips, tricks, and fundamentals that they go through to be successful. And hopefully you can latch on to some of the things that they have done. And you probably heard when Jeff started out early in the interview that there were some tips that he gave you from surveying the organization, and he's very goal oriented. You've heard that from a few others that have been on the podcast, and I've mentioned that to you before as well. But you're going to see some similarities of individuals that have been on the podcast. And so those similarities are the things that you definitely need to latch onto as you are trying to create your growth plan and your goals to climb your growth ladder. So until next week, this is Tonya Gossage, your performance banker, and Jeff Starke, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to download and subscribe wherever you get your shows. Find more content on our YouTube channel. Link is in the show notes. This podcast is sponsored by GossagePerformanceConsulting.com.